Okay, so today during class, we started talking about kind of the end of the war. So I'm going to use some maps to show you what we were talking about. So towards the end of the war, we've talked, oh, wrong one. We've talked about D-Day last week, which is the official date of the beginning of the invasion to try to get all this land back from Germany, which as of, here's November 1942, Germany controlled all these countries right here. So Russia was fighting on this side, and the Allies were fighting right here. France had been taken over. So we were trying to come and liberate all these areas from German power. So we basically landed on these beaches on D-Day and started the invasion of Normandy. And then over the next several months, we kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until finally the Russians were pushing from this side. So we basically compacted and surrounded Germany until they eventually had to retreat. This is, that's 1939, but that's what it looked like afterwards. So, there we go. Axis power is right here. So after we liberated France and we pushed all the way, basically when Germany was surrendering, Hitler retired to his bunker and shot himself and killed himself. Now there is conspiracies that he did not kill himself, that he escaped, and it's a body double that they found there. But personally, I don't believe that, because I think that if he would have escaped, he would have done something after he escaped, and even if it was several years. And by now he would have been dead. So the fact that nothing happened means that he didn't escape. That really was him, at least in my opinion. You're free to think what you want, because we don't really have concrete evidence either way. So now, and this is VE Day, Victory in Europe Day. So now the only place that we have left to fight against is the Japanese in the Pacific Theater. So the Japanese had controlled over here, Korea, and taking control of China right here. And then they started spreading out their influence in this whole area right here. Get all the resources, expanding and taking control. That was their goal, was to take all of this. They didn't really care about what was going on in Europe. They just wanted control of the Pacific. So the Battle of Midway, which, there we go, Midway Island right here, is basically midway between Japan and the US, which is about right here. The Battle for Midway was basically like the Pacific D-Day. After that battle, we basically started, it's like dominoes, we basically started island hopping, as they call it, and hopping to all these different islands to kick out the Japanese, basically, and kicked all of them out until it was just Japan. So that is the point that we're going to stop, though, because we'll talk about the very end of the war for the Japanese and leading up to VJ Day, which is the official end of World War II. We'll talk about that tomorrow. So I wanted to show you guys where you're going to be doing your assignment today. You guys is basically, we looked at something in the hallway and we had a questionnaire that we were writing from. So that's, I'm going to show you where that's at on here. So right here under Wednesday, April 14th, this is where your class will be once I publish it. This Code Talkers assignment was due today, so I'm going to make sure you get that turned in. Here's a World War II Atrocities assignment. So you click on that and it's going to show you what we're doing. And I didn't post the thing. Let me post it real quick. Okay, so now it's up there. So this is the link to the PowerPoint. You just got to click on that to download and open it. So it has a bunch of different things. First is going to talk about the Holocaust. Some things that we talked about after class today are at the end, which is not in here about the Holocaust, is the fact, something that people kind of forget, 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust, but 5 million more people died as well, who were gypsies, homosexuals, Soviets, political dissidents, or people who didn't like the Nazis, that were, Germans. So basically anybody else, that's the extent of the Nazi and Hitler's wrath, is 11 million people died. 6 million of them were Jews. That was the main target, but lots of other people died as well. So that's one thing that we talked about. You'll see in reading and the pictures all, the extent of how horrible it is, especially if you've never heard of the Holocaust before. But Auschwitz was one of the concentration camps. That was a death camp that most of the deaths occurred. You have the gas chambers where they would filter in poison gas in there and kill everybody. At least they tried to, because some people didn't die from the poison gas. So it was kind of like torture because it was inside of their body and it was killing them, but they didn't die in the chamber. So what they did was they just grabbed them and chucked them into the furnaces and burned them. So the crematoriums. That's the primary way of killing people for the Nazis, was doing that. So let's see, what else did we talk about? There's a picture of the pile of shoes where they just took anything that would be valuable. There's pictures that you can find on the internet of like piles of wedding rings that they took off before they were killed. There's a lot of horrible things that you'll see and read about on here. And Hitler, he tried to get rid of the Jews first by giving them the option to leave voluntarily. But when people weren't leaving voluntarily, he's like, all right, I gotta force them. So he kind of started forcing people to leave. Then he just round them up and they started shooting people to kill them. After they dug their own graves, they would shoot them. And then that just wasn't working fast enough to get rid of the Jews. So that's when they started the crematoriums and gas chambers in the camps. So, and then the second part of the PowerPoint is about atrocities. Now, atrocity, that means something largely just horrible and some of the worst things you could ever do, but a widespread. So killing someone, that's a horrible thing to do. Torturing someone, those are horrible. But if you do a lot of people, it's a widespread problem. That's what makes it an atrocity. So the atrocities were committed by many different countries. And you'll see this number one of this question, what made the Holocaust such a horrible event? You'll kind of list some things that you read and learned about in the first section of the PowerPoint. Number two has to do with the atrocities. So what are the connections you make that the countries have similar with each other or different from each other? And there's individual things of the worst things. So the Germans, their worst atrocity was a Holocaust. The Soviets, their worst atrocities they did was the mass rape and murder of Germans. Widespread, a lot. The British, the worst that they did was there's a city of Dresden, Germany, and they just basically annihilated and almost leveled the whole city with bombings. There were no soldiers there; it was just citizens. American atrocities, we had the Japanese camps that we talked about last week, which they weren't like Germany concentration camps like we talked about, but they still were camps. They were still not fair and not constitutional and not right and racist. So, and then also we have the dropping of the atomic bombs. A lot of people would consider those to be atrocities because they basically only killed civilians. Very few soldiers were killed, just mostly civilians. And then the mutilation that we did to Japanese soldiers, here's some gross stories for you. Soldiers would take the skulls of dead Japanese and mail it to someone as a gift. The president got one as a gift. There's a picture of some random woman who's smiling and writing a thank you note to her boyfriend who sent her a skull. Another thing that they would do, they would mutilate and cut off their ears, and then they would just hang it onto their belt and show around like trophies. It's gross. One guy even knocked gold teeth out of a Japanese soldier who was still alive and wasn't even dead yet. The guy's thrashing and he's trying to knock out his teeth, and then some guy luckily came out and shot him and put him out of his misery so he didn't have to suffer anymore. But it's horrible. And then the Japanese, they've done a lot of horrible things. they're pretty aggressive people, really. They're very intense. We'll just put it that way. A lot of the things that they've done in history. Like there's one story of Japanese soldiers throwing little infants up in the air and shooting them as if it was like a moving target, like it was a game. Horrible. But there's two specific things I want to mention about the Japanese. It talks about it in here, but I'll just give you a little bit more information. So the raping of Nanjing, which is a city in China. I mean, after they took control of this town, they just went around for days and days. It was actually a competition to see how many heads they could cut off. And they would rape every woman they saw in sight. It was bad. It was really bad. And then the other one was using comfort women, which the Japanese still never apologized for. And they only recently said, oh, well, yeah, we had some part in it, but that's all they really did. A lot of people still think it's a myth that the Japanese forced women to be slaves, like cooking and cleaning during the day for soldiers, and at night they were sexual slaves and forced them to be prostitutes. Most of these women were Korean. A lot of Chinese women were there too, and it's horrible what they did and forced these women to do. So anyways, you're going to go to the PowerPoint that's right here, answer these 3 questions. This last one, after you're done with the PowerPoint, total war is basically any war that it just means that like there's no limits, there's no boundaries, there's no right and wrong. You just do it. There's no limits of, it's humane to do this, but not humane to do that. So there's no boundaries. There's no laws of war, so torture, killing of civilians, raping, looting, like it's just, whatever you want to do pretty much. So, and usually when total war is used, you have innocent people tortured, innocent people dying, horrible things happening, like the atrocities that you're learning about in here. So your number 3 is just answering how was total war used in World War II. So each of these questions, a few sentences, complete sentences, definitely, to answer these 3 questions. And that's all we did in class today. So make sure that you get that done and turn it in. And yeah, that's all we did for class today.